Hello everybody, welcome to the channel. I'm James, and in this video I'm going to be doing a review of Hobby King's Durafly de Havilland Vampire, which is an RC jet. That was certainly a mouthful. So again, this is a jet model that is made by Durafly and it is distributed by Hobby King. Hobby King contacted me and asked if I'd like to do some reviews for them. And I was looking at the different planes they had, and I chose this. I thought this would be interesting for us to take a look at. So they agreed and they sent it over, and that's what we'll be doing here. So in this video, I'm going to be doing an unboxing. I'm going to check out what's in the box. We'll look at the instructions. We'll look at the components. We'll go over the specs, and then I'm going to go ahead and set it up. This is a PNP, which means it's a plug and play, which means all you need to get this thing up in the air after some minor assembly. You know, I think there's 20 steps or so to put this thing together. After you put it together, the only thing you need to supply for this would be your own battery and then your transmitter receiver setup. Everything else is already pre-installed. The motor is installed, the servos are installed, that type of thing. So in any case, again, it's a PNP. Now, as a disclaimer, I wanted to mention, you'll see it on the screen here, it says this includes a paid promotion. So YouTube has a requirement if you're doing a review of an item that somebody sent you, that's considered a paid promotion. I'm not getting paid money for this. What happened is they sent me this plane to review, and so I have to disclose that. And there it is. So let me go ahead and flip this over and pull it out of the box. Just get it out of the way. And there we are. Doesn't have anything written on the side, so pretty much everything is written up here on the front top of it. All right, so we'll talk about the actual Vampire in a minute, but first let's go ahead and talk about the specs of the plane, the model. So it says Vampire version 3. That is not the third variant of the actual Vampire. This is just the third version of this particular model. They've made improvements over the years on this. So it comes in two color schemes. It comes in the Royal Air Force camouflage, which this one is, and it also comes in the Royal Canadian Air Force silver. And here are the different specs. So the wingspan here says 1100 millimeters, which is about 43 inches. The length is 888 millimeters, and that's about 35 inches long. The weight comes in at 1,050 grams, which is about 37 ounces, which is about 2.3 pounds. So it has this electric speed control, the ESC. It's a 60 amp, and then it comes with servos. So servos are already installed. There's 4 of those, and then there's also servoless retracts right here. And then for our motor, we have a 70 millimeter, about 2800 to 3300 kilovolt RPM brushless outrunner. And then, as I mentioned, you're going to have to supply your own radio and receiver and your own battery. And they recommend a LiPo, a 4S, 2200 to 3300 milliamp LiPo 30C minimum. Okay, here we go. Well, there's the wing. So I want to start by just pulling out the parts and setting them aside. I want to find the instructions and the documentation to go over that first. I think I can just pull this straight out. That's the wing, obviously. Cut it open here. Nicely packaged. Get this out of the way. Here is, all right, here's a quick setup guide. We'll look at that in just a second. And I think, let's see here. I think it doesn't show the actual manual. You can download the manual here from the website, or just go to the website and you can download a PDF, which I did. So I actually have that. I just wasn't sure if they actually had it here in the box. So let me grab the manual. All right, so here is the manual. I'm going to go ahead and set this aside again. I'm just going to take the parts out of the box and get the box out of the way. Here is the fuselage. We'll take it out of the plastic in just a minute. Here is the tail plane. Here are the tail booms and the canopy. It doesn't come with a pilot, kind of a bummer there. It'd be nice to have a pilot in there because it is a clear canopy. I guess you can kind of try to cut into that and put one in yourself if you wish. But anyhow, yeah, it'd be nice if they had a pilot in there. And then a little hardware bag, which we'll take a look at. So let me get the box out of the way, and we'll take a look at the instructions first, and then we'll look at all the parts and such. All right, here's our manual, and again, here's our quick setup guide. Now, the thing is, it does say quick setup, but really doesn't give you much more than just go to the website and download the manual. Or you can just look at it on your phone or computer or whatever. You don't have to download it. So it does give the specs again on the quick setup guide here. And it does give you the throws, and I'm sure the throws are going to be in here for the control surfaces and also the center of gravity, again in millimeters. Everything is 8 to 12 millimeters for your throws, for your high and your low. And the I converted those, that's about 0.3 to 0.47 inches. So you're talking somewhere around 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch for your high and your low. And then your center of balance is 311 millimeters from the nose to the point here, which is about a foot, about 12 inches. Okay, so before we jump into the manual, I do want to point out again that this is a scale RC jet, meaning that this was a real airplane. The Vampire was a real airplane, and this is a scale version of that airplane. So I thought it'd be nice to be able to talk a little bit about it. You know, I'm not an expert on this plane. I'm not an expert in aviation, but I'll tell you, what I know about this. I did some looking into it. So again, the Vampire was produced by the de Havilland Aviation Company, which was an aviation company that came out of or was in the United Kingdom. They had a subsidiary in Canada, one in Australia. They produced all kinds of planes over many years. They were around from about 1920 to 1963 or so. And probably one of the most famous planes that they produced, at least in terms of World War II history, is the Mosquito, the twin-engine fighter bomber. They also produced the Chipmunk, which was a trainer, another pretty iconic airplane. And they built all kinds of planes over the years, different variants and such. So the Vampire was originally went into development in about 1941, and it had its first flight in about 1943 or so. It missed the war. It didn't see any combat. And in 1946, that's kind of when it went into major production. Eventually, it led to about 3,000 plus of the planes being built. There were lots of exports. The plane it was around for a long time. It finally retired. The last versions of it flying was by the Swiss Air Force, and they retired it in 1990. So it was around for a long, long time. It was generally obsolete by about 1953 or so. But again, it was around for a long time as a trainer and such. So, a really cool airplane. So the Vampire is a pretty iconic airplane. It is the first single-engine jet fighter produced by the British, and that's why it's designed the way it is. They obviously have the single engine, and in order to accommodate that, they moved the tail section out of the way, and that's why they designed it with the tail booms and the tailplane as it's shown here. And from what I can tell, looking at some resources, there's lots of information on it. From what I can tell, the scale version of this Hobby King Durafly model looks pretty close. I don't know, if it's how exact it is, but you really will get a pretty good representation of the Vampire. And so I'm really looking forward to flying this thing. It looks pretty darn cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and get back to the manual. Again, I printed this out, downloaded it from the website. So here it is again, our Vampire version 3. A little bit of warning and precautions to be aware of. You want to check that out. A little table of contents. You can see there's not too much in here. We only got about 13 pages or so to look at. Not a lot of steps. Here's a little introduction to the model again, talking about some of its features, a little bit of the history of the plane like we talked about, but this is nice, kind of read through that. And then some of the specs again, what's required. Again, you need to have your own receiver and transmitter, and then your own battery. Everything else is already installed in the plane itself. Some more safety precautions here to make sure you review. Then here's some of the parts of the plane. Just not really a whole bunch here. You just basically have the fuselage, the canopy, the tail booms, of course the wings, and then the tail plane that you have to glue together, and then the hardware set here. So not a lot there. Okay, now we move on to the actual assembly of the plane. There's not a lot of steps. There's about 20 steps, and there's not a whole bunch to do in each one of the steps. So it should be pretty straightforward, and it shouldn't take you too long. So this is a foam airplane, and they do suggest using a CA glue for foam. You can use a hot glue gun if you wanted. I don't think I would use that. I'm going to use just a 5-minute epoxy to glue the parts together. So we start out here installing the control horns for the ailerons in both wings, and the connecting rods for those. Again, the servo's already installed. You just have to assemble, you just have to screw on the control horn and then connect it up. And now we move on to installing our first tail boom. It's going to be the left-hand tail boom. And then the next step is to glue the actual wings onto the fuselage. And what we're going to do is we're going to sand off, this model is painted, and again it's foam, so you're going to sand off the paint so we have a fresh surface to bond when we bond the two pieces together. We don't want to bond paint on paint. And now we move on to our tailplane assembly. Again, we have the servo, which is located in the center of the tailplane, as you can see here. And once again, we have to attach our control horn and our connecting rod, and again, fish some of the wires through and stuff, kind of manage those wires. And then we're going to go ahead and sandwich the tailplane in between the tail booms. And then our final step is just to attach the wings themselves, and then we're finished with the assembly. The canopy is just going to snap on. That's how you're going to access your radio and your batteries and such. So in any case, that's about it. Again, it's a pretty quick assembly. Okay, let's go ahead and start with our wings. Each one is nicely packaged in itself, kind of a sealed plastic. And there is our right wing. And it's a very nice looking, very clean looking, has panel lines on it. Those are pretty thick panel lines, but you know, that's pretty nice. And then here's our ailerons, which are already connected. They do suggest that you do put some tape on these. I'll have to look into that, but I think it's fine as is, but you can choose the option later to add some reinforcing tape on here. But in any case, you can see this is painted on. These are not decals. Well, yeah, actually they are decals, but they're done pretty well. I thought at first they were painted. But yeah, very nice paint job, very clean. And because they are these nice decals, you can kind of see how they're recessed into the panel lines. That's some pretty nice detail there. And then below the wings here we have our landing gear already assembled and installed. And there is our servos for our ailerons. Very nice looking. And here's the wires for our hookups for our ailerons and our landing gear. So let me move the wings out of the way here real quick, and we'll take a look at the fuselage. Okay, there's our fuselage, and I can kind of feel how heavy it is. It's got the motor installed back in here, as you can see, and then a little servo sort of mounting tray for your battery and such. Here's the landing gear recessed up in here. And then if we look closely, we can see the servo, which steers the nose gear. You know, nice, again, nice paint job. Decals are nice. And here is our ESC back down in here. Now we'll go ahead and open up the canopy. Looks like it connects with a magnet. That makes sense. Just like that. Canopy looks pretty nice. It's too bad there's no pilot in there, but in any case, looks pretty good. Now we can move on to our tail booms. Pretty simple. It does not have rudders, so you're going to be just basically has aileron control and elevator. And then this is the right tail boom, which has the hookup for the elevator servo. And now we can go ahead and grab our tail plane. And there's our elevator servo in there and the connection for that. Seems pretty tight, probably have to loosen it up a little bit. Again, you know, it has a nice detail, has a nice paint job. And then we have a hardware pack. And we have our control rods and our clevises. Here's our control horns. This is a little wrench. I don't know what, yeah, that is a little Allen wrench. And then here are some, oh, here's some Velcro. We'll figure out what that is for later. And here are some extensions or leads for some of the servos. Okay, so that's going to be about it for the parts. And now we'll get on to the assembly. So the first thing I like to do when I'm putting anything together is get a little tray like this old pie tin and throw all my little parts in there so I don't lose anything. Make sure you don't throw any screws away. This must be for the elevator. Yeah, it's a short one. Should be able to figure that out, but it's actually marked, so they're all marked here so you don't get them messed up. This one says elevator. And of course, here's our leads, and then these ones are marked with ailerons. Nice. And then for my radio, I'm just going to be using my trusty Futaba 6-channel. This is a T6J, and I'm going to be using this R2006GS receiver. It's a 6-channel receiver. That'll be my radio setup. And then for my battery, I'm going to be using this Turnigy 40C 3000 milliamp LiPo battery pack. Alright, so one final word before I jump into assembling the model. My recommendation is that if you've never assembled something like this before in the past, and this is your first time or you haven't done too many of them, always follow the instructions step by step. Read them a couple times over and make sure you're familiar with what you're going to do before you do it, especially if you're gluing something. You don't want to glue something on and then make a mistake, because that would be pretty bad. You're not going to be able to come back from that if you accidentally glued on something incorrectly. So really follow the instructions. If you have more experience doing this type of thing and you're more comfortable kind of bouncing around a little bit, then by all means, do it that way. You do what you need to do to make it and build your kit in the best way that you can. But again, if you've never done something like this, always follow the instructions to a T, and that way it's almost guaranteed that it will come out right. Okay, so that being said, I'm going to be doing everything in the instructions. I'm just going to do them in a little bit different order of the steps. I'm going to be installing the control horns first, but I'm not going to hook them up to the servos until after I get my radio installed. That's going to be the big thing that I do differently. Once I get the radio installed, then the servos are going to adjust themselves and get centered, and then I'll hook them up with the control rods to the control horns. So that's just the way I'm going to do it. So I'm going to start by putting the control horns on. I'm going to move on to sanding the surfaces I have to sand the paint off for the to get the fresh styrofoam for the glue bonds, and then we'll just continue on as the instructions say. Okay, so the first step that I'm going to be doing is installing the control horns, and the instructions say there are actually 2 screws, but there's actually 4, and you get the control horn and then you get this little backing plate here, and you notice that the backing plate is flat on one side and then it has these little protrusions on the other side. I found that those protrusions are actually going to be the ones that set into the surface. So I'm going to go ahead, and I did the ones on the wing already, and so I'll show you really quick here how they go on the tail. This is going to go on this side, like that. And this guy goes on here like this. And then you have your the little screws. And I did find that they were a little bit kind of challenging to get lined up. They are small, and you are dealing with foam, so it is soft. So you have to be careful. It's kind of a delicate process. You just have to kind of work with it and get them to screw in correctly. Sometimes it helps to use something like a pin like this to kind of get in there and kind of clean out the hole a little bit and get things lined up on both sides like that. That kind of helps get it lined up, so you can go ahead and put your screw in there. So anyhow, it's no big deal. You just have to work with it a little bit. Then I would suggest don't tighten them all up one at a time. Get them all in there, get them set, kind of get them seated into that little backing plate, and then go ahead, and once they're all attached, then go ahead and tighten the screws up. And you don't want to make them too tight. You don't want to crush the foam. It's definitely soft. You have to be careful. We'll pop all these guys in here. Okay, so my next step is I'm going to go ahead and sand off the painted surface in the wing root here. This is the wing. Here is the connection on the fuselage. I do find this to be a little bit of an odd thing that they make you do here. They could avoid doing this if they just mask this off. It seems like it's a little odd to make you do this for a PNP airplane. So in any case, I'll do it, and I don't want it's going to get messy, so I'm going to do it outside and probably wear a dust mask. I kind of think this is one thing that I don't like so far about this. Everything else has been good to this point, but I kind of think this step should not be. They should actually do this a little bit different and just have this cleaned up for you, so you can just go ahead and glue it on. Okay, so I finished doing that sanding to remove the paint. As you can see here in the wing root on both sides and also on the wing itself. Got most of it off, and I think that's going to be good enough. And you know, like I will say, that I did not like that. That was a pain. It took a little longer than I expected, and it made a mess. And also, you know, it really gets dust inside of the fuselage itself. So really, that's not a good thing in my opinion. I think they should mask this off and then paint it, and then just have a fresh surface for people. But that's my opinion. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to the assembly and start gluing all this together. And then for my epoxy, I'm just going to be using JB Weld's 5-minute epoxy. Okay, so I noticed another little issue with the instructions, and I'm not sure if those instructions that you currently download are maybe for the older versions of this plane. Not sure about that, but on number 7 here, it says to feed the aileron Y lead connector out of the wing root. This is before you connect the wing. And what they're getting at here is that you would take your Y connector for your aileron, it would be inside of your fuselage, you would feed it out, and then you'd plug it into the wing, into the wires into the wing, and tuck it into the wing. However, if you look at the wing itself, it does not have a compartment or a space for any wires. This is the inlet for the fan, and these have to feed into, these are your wires coming off of your servos. These have to feed into the fuselage. They have to go into the fuselage and connect inside of the fuselage. What they're saying in the instructions is to connect these, connect the Y lead outside of the fuselage into the wires coming off of the wing, and then I guess tuck those into the wing, but there's nowhere to put these wires. This is just flat, and there's no space, there's no compartment in the wing root itself. So I think that may be because this is an older set of plans or set of instructions, so just make sure you check that out. So the way to do it, or the way that I'm doing it at least, the way I think you need to do it, is to actually feed these wires into the fuselage and then plug it in and glue it in like that. And that's what I'm going to do right now. I already got this one already on, as you can see here, and that's what I did on this one. And those are my aileron wires right there, and my landing gear wire right there. So that's how I think it has to go. So just check that out. Just be aware of that. Just make sure you're okay with that. Okay, mix in some more epoxy, and we'll epoxy this other wing onto the fuselage. Okay, I will say that overall the fit is pretty good. Things slide in the way they should, and they're nice and secure. And again, just have to take your time. I'm going to feed these wires in through here. This is what I was mentioning. There's no way you would plug this in plug it into the wing itself. Everything goes through into the fuselage in that manner. Probably be nice to have somebody help you do this step, because it's sort of you need another set of hands. We'll just plug this in here. There we go. Then you can pull the wires a little bit gently to kind of bring it all together. There we go. Okay, so I'll let this wing cure, and then we'll come back and install the tail plane. Now, one deviation that I did from the instructions is the instructions said to install the wing with the boom, then install the tail plane, and then install the other wing and the boom onto the tail plane in that manner. I think it's actually be easier to install the wings as you're seeing here, and then just go ahead and install the tail plane in between the booms later. And this is flexible enough where you can kind of spread them apart to make that happen. So I think that's the way I'm going to do it. And again, you know, check out the instructions, do what the instructions say if you're not comfortable deviating from them, but I think that I can do it this way, and I think it'll be just fine. And then now for our tail plane, we'll just go ahead and plug our servo in first. Then we'll plug it into the little slot they have made for it here. Okay, so for me, you know, this is solid. This little connection that goes into the boom is solid, like on this side right here, as you can see right there. there's no space, there's not a lot of space for the actual wire to sort of kind of crunch up inside there. It's not like it's an extra kind of hollowed out area. So what I did is I actually cut a little bit of this open, as you can see here, made a little sort of compartment so that I can kind of get those wires plugged in there. Okay, so the epoxy has now cured and everything is now assembled. There's no more gluing to be done. I do like to use pins. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but pins are nice to help hold everything together. I use these big kind of T-pins like this. It's foam, so they come out easily, and any kind of dent that happens in the foam will sort of heal itself over time, I think. And then so down to the next big step, or the next final step, I guess, is to install the electronics, which is just basically the receiver, your own receiver, your own battery, and hook all that up, which should be pretty straightforward. And then once the receiver's in and the battery's in, we can turn it on and I can check the servos, and then we'll go ahead and install the linkages from the servos to the different control surfaces. So that'll be the final step. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull off our canopy and we'll take a look at our wiring. Now, let me see if I'll just pull these out. They're all pre-marked, which is very nice. So I have here, I have an aileron for the right wing, aileron for the left wing. So here's my ailerons here, and then I have my gear for the main gear in the wings, and then I also have a gear connection for the front landing gear. That's going to be this guy right here, and then so there's 3 coming off the landing gear, and then we have our what says rudder, but we don't have a rudder on this plane, but we do have a steerable front landing gear, and that's going to be plugged into your rudder connection. And then of course we have an elevator and we have our throttle in here as well. Now for the ailerons and for the landing gear, the main landing gear, we have these connections, these sort of Y connections. The one with 3 on it, it's not really a Y, right? But it's similar to a Y connection. It has marked gear, as you can see there. So this one will plug into, again, the front gear and then the main landing gear coming out of the wing. So we'll plug those in. So let's get this guy right here real quick. And I'm just going to line them up. This guy's like that. And this one, it doesn't matter which one you put in which, because they all go down at the same time and the function is just straight up and down, so it doesn't matter. Like your ailerons, you're going to have to make sure your ailerons plug into the correct spot of your receiver if you're going to be using flaperons. I'll explain that in just a minute. So again, this one's the gear also. So there's our gear setup. And then again for the ailerons, now here's the thing I was just mentioning. So you have an aileron in the right wing and the aileron in the left wing. You can use the Y connector and just plug that straight into your receiver if you just want to have the ailerons function as ailerons. And if you have the proper setup, if you have the right transmitter and electronics, you can also plug these individually into your channels and actually have it mixed as a flaperon. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep it simple, keep it basic, and just have one, just basically use the ailerons as they are, and then maybe later down the road maybe I'll switch it and see how it works with flaperons. But that's your aileron connection. Okay, and I'll just get my receiver, I'll plug it in, and then of course I got my battery, and there is a tray here which has a Velcro, kind of a little belt on it, like a strap, and then we'll put that in, and then we'll be able to move the battery forward or backward to help with the balance when we set up the balance. Okay, so now I have all of the servos connected, and a couple of things I wanted to point out with that is that when they ship it to you, the control arm on the servo is basically tucked in here in this little slot. It's basically parallel with the wing. They probably do that just for shipping purposes so that it doesn't get damaged. So you will have to get in here and take the control arm off and readjust it so that it's 90 degrees to the wing as shown there. They do give you, or they do put these little slots in the wing so that you can actually get a screwdriver and get to that little screw in there. Unfortunately, they don't do that in the tail section, as you can see, and I had to just cut a little slot myself in order to get to that one. It's a little unfortunate, but oh well. That was easy enough to do, but not a big deal. So I still need to make the final adjustments on the servos to make sure the control throws are the right distances, and also to make sure everything is aligned. I'll do that later off camera, but I just wanted to do a little bit of a test here to show all of the different channels and how they're working. So let me go ahead and turn on the electronics in the fuselage. I still have to organize my electronics and get everything secured in there, but right now this is good. So we'll turn that on, and we'll turn on my transmitter, make sure that my throttle is down or off. So there we go. And now we'll go ahead and test everything. Here are the ailerons. And then here is the elevator. And then we go ahead and do the landing gear. There we go. And then we'll do our steerable nose gear. Oh, there goes my motor. And then obviously there's the motor, and I'm not gonna do full throttle on this, but we'll go ahead and do a little bit of a test. All right, very nice. Now, one thing I wanted to point out for the nose gear here is that they do give you a little Allen key, this guy right here, and you can adjust the orientation or the alignment of the wheel here. There's a little Allen screw right down inside here you can't see. You can just loosen that up, and then you can just kind of rotate the wheel to get it aligned properly. So that's very nice to have that as well. But yeah, the landing gear looks like it's working very nicely. I really like that. I like how it kind of tucks in when it goes in. Cool. Okay folks, well there it is. It's the Durafly de Havilland Vampire that you can pick up from Hobby King. It's a nice model, you know, it went together fairly well. It didn't have any major problems that I saw. A couple things here and there, but no big deal. Overall, it probably took, you know, between 2 to 3 hours to get this thing set up. So it is ready for its maiden flight, which I'll be doing in an upcoming video. But before I do that, I'm actually going to jump back onto my current build, which is the Aeromite. It's a little balsa plane, and I'm building it off a set of plans that you see there hanging on the wall. So I'm going to jump back onto that. I got to get the landing gear on. That'll be the next video there. So until then, thanks for watching my channel. I really appreciate it, and we will see you next time.